Welcome everyone, my name is Cesar Iliano and I am the Content Director for BNamericas. As we do every year, we have published our Outlook report for 2021 and we want to share the highlights with you today. Michael Place, our regional energy editor, will be presenting those highlights and then he will be leading a conversation with two of our energy reporters in the field, Cristóbal Riego and Joao Montenegro. So I'll now leave you with Mike.
Thank you, Cesar. If the prevailing sentiment among oil and gas companies in Latin America at the start of 2020 was one of optimism, fueled by rising oil prices and myriad new exploration opportunities, the contrast with the imminent new year could hardly be starker. The coronavirus pandemic, which sent oil prices crashing to their lowest levels in decades in April as lockdown measures crippled demand, has left the sector with a collective sense of trepidation and uncertainty. Latin America has been among the hardest hit regions, both on a human and economic level. And the oil and gas sector was particularly exposed to headwinds in the first 3 months of the pandemic, as rig counts plummeted and investment stalled. However, benchmark crude prices have steadily recovered in the second half of 2020, prompting operators across the region to restart suspended projects and upwardly revise capital spending. As you can see in this slide, the EIA forecasts Brent crude oil prices will average $47 a barrel in 2021. And we've already seen actually that the prices are nudging that figure now. So perhaps, we could even think of that figure being as the lower end of the range. The BNamericas survey showed 48% of industry executives are working on 2021 budgets with an expected price of $40 to $50 a barrel. Again, the way that prices have picked up in the last couple of months, we could perhaps see that moving to the $50 or $60 barrel range. Now, in our recent BNamericas oil and gas survey, we asked our respondents when they believe investment levels in the oil and gas sector will recover to pre-coronavirus levels. The response there was more than 50% said that they expected investments to fully recover by the second half of 2021. And then the second most popular response was 2022 or beyond, with 14% saying that it would happen in the first half of 2021. So if we combine those two figures for 2021, that's 66%, 2/3 of our respondents believe that a full recovery will take place in 2021. Which country presents the best investment climate for E&P investment in the near or mid-term? Rather surprisingly, Colombia leads there. Now, Colombia is obviously taking major steps to attract investment in oil and gas, both through onshore projects, through offshore projects, through fracking, also with midstream and downstream opportunities. Now that made up 29% of our responses. Brazil was next, making up 24%, followed by Mexico. There is still quite a bit of optimism, I guess, surrounding Mexico, despite the anti-competitive policies of President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. And then we have following Mexico, Chile, Guyana, and then the remainder of Latin America's countries. So the BNamericas outlook highlights. We believe that Brazil will lead the rebound, helped by the low break-even prices of pre-salt projects and the prospect of at least 2 major auctions for drilling rights in 2021. International oil price trends will likely have a lesser effect on Mexico than other Latin American markets. Pemex has a mandate from the government to lift output at all costs, while private players, while being somewhat sidelined, have been developing early stage projects and can look beyond their bets on short-term prices, looking towards long-term prices. So in 2021, as I mentioned in the previously, Colombia will offer E&P companies a chance to bid for onshore blocks, up to 60 of those, and offshore blocks as well. There are only a few there, but they will be included in the fourth cycle of the permanent offer process. Midstream developers will have an eye on the $700 million Pacific LNG project, which finally was launched. A tender was launched in October after several years of planning. Bidding is due there in April. And there is also a $400 million pipeline project from Jobo in the north of Colombia to Medellin, which is moving forward, and it's being developed by Canacol, the Canadian oil junior. Guyana needs to engage the population into the huge economic transformation they face, and the industry also needs to move quickly enough to develop its hydrocarbon resources before renewable technologies overtake fossil fuels as the world's main energy source. Now, even though it has created programs to allow operators to play in the shale gas market, the destiny of Argentina's hydrocarbon sector in 2021 will be subject to Brent prices, as well as the health of the local economy, as always, and that is a big uncertainty in Argentina. And Evo Morales' return to Bolivia from exile after Luis Arce was sworn in as president reveals the strong support the former head of state still enjoys, and may curb attempts to ease the grip of nationalization on the sector. I'm joined now by my colleagues Cristobal Riego and João Montenegro. Good morning, guys.
Morning, Michael.
João, let's start with you. A question about Brazil. How are the prospects for oil and gas investment in Brazil? And will, in your view, pre-salt again be leading the way? And will the government move ahead with its plans for at least 2 options in 2021?
Sure, Mike. The prospects are good. The Brazilian pre-salt has definitely proved its resilience amid the COVID-19 global crisis, and it will certainly keep leading local exploration and production activities growth in 2021. According to S&P Global Platts, oil production is expected to increase by over 300,000 barrels a day by end 2021, and it's mainly driven by Petrobras Santos Basin projects. For instance, Mero 1 and Sepia fields are planned to produce first oil next year, and this is not pre-salt, but it's an important project by Equinor, the Norwegian company. Peregrino field would start its second phase development project in the Campos Basin also in 2021. And besides, there are multiple drilling campaigns by private companies such as ExxonMobil scheduled for next year. Exxon will drill a wildcat well in Sergipe-Alagoas Basin, resuming drilling activities here in the country. When it comes to oil auctions, in 2021, Brazil will hold the 17th concession round, in addition to the second transfer of rights tender, which is a big auction that will offer the Itapu and Sepia areas, and possibly the third round of ANP's open acreage program.
Excellent, João. So there's a lot happening in Brazil. We will be waiting for those opportunities to come along, and I think there's a lot of optimism by the sound of it surrounding Brazil. Let's move on to Cristobal. Chris, how is the sector looking in Mexico? Is there any brighter news for investors, or is there a feeling that the anti-competitive and protectionist policies of President Andrés Manuel López Obrador will continue to limit investor opportunities?
Hi, Mike. Thank you for the question. So Mexico is, I would say, a stark contrast to what Joao was telling us about Brazil. It is difficult to understate how important the oil and gas sector, and Pemex in particular, is to the platform and the political agenda of President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or AMLO. Pemex is really at the center of his energy strategy, together with the Comisión Federal de Electricidad, the CFE, in the electric power sector. And so we definitely expect the government to keep boosting Pemex, to keep seeking sometimes unconventional strategies to favor the company, both in the exploration and production segment, also in the fuel sales segment. That is not going to change, but that doesn't mean that there will be no opportunities for private players. I think the government has put a lot of emphasis on the fact that the existing contracts and the existing acreage that was awarded to private companies will be respected. The CNH, the National Hydrocarbons Commission, has been tough but fair with companies. They have reviewed and approved the project. There hasn't been a permitting, like a stoppage of permitting of the permitting process or the regulatory process. And I think it's interesting because Pemex has very lofty and ambitious production targets. They want to lift their output from around 1.7 million barrels per day this year, which is in the ballpark of what they've been producing over the last few years, to around closer to 2 million barrels per day next year and 2022 and in 2023. And the question is, why is the government so keen on lifting production at a time when international prices are having a crisis and fuel demand is down and everything we know? And the reason is because they've been pushing a very ambitious refining agenda. They keep building the 8.9 billion Dos Bocas refinery in Tabasco. They are overhauling the country's refining capacity with the 6 Pemex refineries, the traditional refineries, which need a lot of maintenance, but they could lift their refining capacity significantly. And so the government expects to end its term refining around 1.8 million barrels per day. And for that, if Pemex is right about its targets, theoretically, the company could fill that entirely. But given what we've seen with Pemex historically, the most likely scenario is that the company will not be able to lift its output, and the government will need private producers to pick up the slack there, around 200,000 million barrels of difference between what Pemex can put out and what the refineries will need. So in that sense, I think the government may actually need private producers to pull out its nationalistic strategy in the oil sector. Now, if we move on to other sectors, there are also opportunities, for example, in the LNG sector, and we've seen the government willing to hand out a very unconventional permit to Talos Energy to export LNG from Mexico, and we may see opportunities for similar projects in the future. Now, in the fuel sales segment, I think the government has been very, very strong in its intent to give Pemex an advantage, which some people call unfair, so that the sales of Pemex products have a clear advantage over private products. And so that I don't think is going to change. In terms of new licensing rounds, they are very, very unlikely at this point. So the government has mentioned a couple of times that it may be open to a few farm outs with Pemex to develop deep water areas that Pemex is ill-equipped to develop. Pemex mostly focuses on shallow water areas. But new licensing rounds, I think, are off the table for now. And so this means that the opportunities for the private sector will be focused on those areas that were already awarded and are being developed and explored right now, and not in new areas.
Right, Chris. Thank you for that insight. So it's not all gloomy news in Mexico. It looks like perhaps there are some silver linings on the horizon for investors there. Let's see what happens in Mexico. Let's move on to Colombia, which, while it doesn't quite have the size, obviously, of Brazil or Mexico, it arguably offers the most diverse array of opportunities for oil and gas investment in Latin America. And I guess that goes in line with a pledge by President Ivan Duque to prioritize the country's most important export industry. Of course, oil and gas accounts for more than 50% of Colombia's export revenue. In the upstream segment, next year will offer E&P companies the chance to bid for up to 60 onshore blocks. The government has said that there will be between 40 and 60 blocks in the 4th cycle of the permanent offer process. And drillers are also expected to be given approval to begin a number of offshore projects off the Caribbean coast, and also spud the country's first fracking pilot wells. In addition to that, there is talk about changes to regulatory measures, and also perhaps a a new law which will finally come into place about prior consultation, which will for the first time enshrine a law that protects the right of local communities and groups to be involved in prior consultation for E&P projects. So in the midstream segment, developers will have an eye on the $700 million Pacific LNG project, which has been in the pipeline for a very long time. And finally, bidding details were published in October. Bids are due for that in April. And in addition to that, also in the midstream segment, we have seen that Canacol is pushing ahead with its $400 million pipeline project from its Jobo gas processing facility to Medellin. So in addition to that, there are another $200 million worth of investments in midstream projects as well. There's also opportunities in the downstream market in Colombia. Ecopetrol has said that it will raise capacity at its Cartagena refinery by integrating its original 50,000 barrel a day crude unit with the new 150,000 Reficar complex. And works are expected to begin in the first half of 2022 with expected investments of $85 million. In addition to that, the developer of Refinería Sebastopol, Latin America's first privately owned refinery project, expects the $5 billion facility to begin operating in late 2023 or early 2024. So things happening in Colombia, which leads us to Guyana. Now, as we mentioned in our introduction, Guyana is the rising star of oil and gas in Latin America. Major discoveries off Guyana's coast by ExxonMobil and its partners are expected to transform an economy that has really relied upon sugar and timber and rice exports, throughout its history, into an oil and gas powerhouse by the end of this decade. However, there are several challenges as Guyana moves to create an institutional framework from scratch and attract investments before the renewable energy transition erodes global oil demand, which we could see happening within a decade. Some of the forecasts say 2 decades, some say a decade, but it looks like it might be sooner rather than later. All the while, the Caribbean nation must be careful not to succumb to the resource curse that has befallen, of course, its oil-rich neighbour, Venezuela. And all the while, burgeoning oil production in Guyana could spawn new synergies with neighbour Trinidad and Suriname, while establishing the Southern Caribbean region as a key energy hub. Even before these synergies come to fruition, the region seems to have been buoyed by Guyana's recent discoveries. Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago and the Dominican Republic are all talking about taking steps to offer new exploration opportunities in their respective offshore basins in a bid to replicate the success of their neighbour. Which moves us on to Argentina. Now, Argentina has long been beset by financial and macroeconomic problems. How is the situation looking now in Argentina, Cristobal? Do you see the panorama improving in 2021?
So Argentina finds itself at a crossroads that I would say it's very familiar to this country, and I think the government is certainly trying to solve it, but the problem basically has to do with certainty, with how much certainty the country can provide to investors to carry out a long-term plan for something so powerful as the Vaca Muerta conventional formation, one of the most promising in the world. So there's certainly the potential, but so far this government and also the past government have fallen under, traditional practices in Argentina, subsidy programs, changes in rules of the game constantly depending on the political and social situation. And so the government is trying now to give a long-term outlook and certainty through a couple of initiatives. The most important is the Gas Plan 4. So a new subsidy plan, but it's not only a subsidy plan, it's also a large-scale tender of the more stable demand for gas in the country. And so companies can sign up and get an outlook of 4 years, so 4-year contracts where they can get an idea of how much they're going to sell in those 4 years, and so plan their production accordingly. And the program has certain requirements. If you sign up, you have to produce a certain amount, but also you get certain benefits. For example, you can sidestep the capital controls to pay dividends abroad, to pay debt abroad, which is something Argentine companies are really struggling with right now because the capital controls are very, very strict. The government is also sponsoring a new hydrocarbons law. Now, this is an interesting proposition, and they have said they expect to give certainty, and but historically we know these kinds of initiatives can also turn sour in Congress with discussions, and we will have to see exactly what is contained in this document to understand its true implications. But the government does at least have the right idea that it wants to provide certainty, and it knows that investors will not come to Vaca Muerta as they should if they do not provide those certainties, those basic certainties. Now, the problem I see is that it is in accordance with a historical pattern in Argentina, where the government is tying the sector with its own finances. So under this gas plan 4, the government will have to pay subsidies to companies at a time where Argentina could not be in a worse financial situation, a more complicated macroeconomic position. The economy minister, Martin Guzman, has been trying to juggle the interests of the ruling coalition, which very much had to do with maintaining the spending, the high spending, and the interests of the restructuring the country's foreign debt. So now he's trying to strike a deal with the IMF, and this has led him to make some cuts in pensions, cuts in other type of spending. And so this has already put him at odds with the ruling coalition and his own party. And so the question is, how long can extra spending by the government in a subsidy program that essentially go into private companies, how long can this be sustained in a situation where the government's finances are deteriorating, money is short, and needs are high? So I think that is the most important thing, whether this gas plan 4 will hold and will be a source of long-term certainty, or like other programs in the past, will crumble down eventually, or have problems, or payments will be delayed, or the rules will be changed. This is what we have seen with some of the previous programs.
Great, thank you for that insight, Chris. Very interesting. Yeah, Argentina is always interesting, never a dull moment there, that's for sure. We want to ask João one more question about Brazil. João, how do you see the Petrobras asset sales progressing? That process has obviously been ongoing. What do you expect to occur in 2021? Do you believe that this process could be concluded by the end of the year, or what exactly do you think we can expect in the next 12 months in regards to the divestments from Petrobras?
So Petrobras currently has over 50 assets for sale, including 8 of its 14 or 15 refineries. And these divestments specifically are expected to be closed in 2021. That's the latest forecast that President Roberto Castelo Branco gave us. And besides that, Petrobras is selling important assets such as Liquigás, which is the LPG distributor, and this divestment is in its final phase. And besides, Petrobras is selling lots of onshore and shallow water fields, and this has been progressing very well in general terms.
Great, thank you for that response, João. So with that, we'll wrap this up. Thank you to our participants, Cristobal Driego and João Montenegro, for your time. We appreciate the time also of our listeners. And with that, I'll pass it back to our content director, Cesar Iliano.
Thank you very much, Michael, Cristobal, and João. That were very interesting insights. If you're watching this video on YouTube, You can click on the link on the description and you will be getting an executive summary of the report. We wish you a happy ending to this difficult year, and we look forward to continue providing actionable insights in 2021. Goodbye.